So I don't know about you, Lori, but last night was a little bit it's a little crazy for me as I was doing my feeding my head, right? Doing my down the rabbit hole stuff and working on a blog post, going into it thinking I'm gonna be really positive about this and I'm gonna put a positive spin on it. The next thing I know, I found so much information that's happened in just the last week that it just got overwhelming. I got a little bit dark.
And that's okay, Chad. That's okay. It is. I mean, like looking at everything that's out there right now with all the changes, I can totally sympathize with you or empathize with you and be like, I can get being there. But part of right being in a change that the world is in right now, especially with AI and us in our in the workplace environment, being just recognizing and being aware that your patterns ran you into dark is actually a really positive thing. So I actually want to give you kudos for recognizing the pattern you were running, right? We as humans are we're pattern making machines, and we're always looking to figure out what's the next answer, what's the solution. And in our society, we're doing that a lot right now. But the truth is some of our most adaptive skills come from actually taking a step back and looking more holistically. So again, kudos to you for seeing the dark. But what that means is then you have a chance to interrupt that pattern and push forward, right, in a different way, saying, okay, I thought about all the things that could go wrong, and I'm still going to move forward towards creating positive systems of change for humanity.
It's my therapist would have been proud as well. I've spent a lot of time in the dark over the years. I think a lot of people have, and it right now can get very overwhelming. And I think for me, kind of to go back to our conversations that we've had, it's really hard to stay in this space that we agreed from the beginning we were going to do with this business, which is we know where we want to end up, and we think we have the first crawl, maybe the first step, that we know what we're going to do. But with all the new information that comes in, the need to remain constantly open to flexibility, to change, to the pivot, like we did, when we did this, and we did the, we effed up episode of this, that was a pivot. But last night, going through and seeing the CEO of Nvidia talking about the next evolution, the next wave is physical AI and all the robotics and the manufacturing, and then good old Elon throwing out his, hey, work's going to be optional in 2 years, which is a scary thought. And you start getting into all of those things and looking at, the announcement that OpenAI is bringing their robotics lab back, which they had shut down, but now, they're going to accelerate that. So it's just all in like the last few days. Like, it's the speed at which this is happening. Like, I know I'm overwhelmed. I can't imagine those that are paying attention to it. Kind of goes back to what we were talking about yesterday. It's like you look to the right, and it's like, that's moving so fast, I don't want to look that way anymore.
I mean, I completely can feel that with you, but then I also look at, right, just who we are as human beings. As human beings, we are consuming so much massive amounts of information that we aren't even aware of that we're consuming. And the truth is, Chad, is you're doing that every day of your life. Even before we became aware of AI and all the changes, and then the big change that's kind of happening in the world right now, like we have in our thinking and in our evolution the ability to consume a ton of information, right? Like you can see the car that's going by and the person that's walking by, and how at the same time your dog is barking at the contractor next door, and whatever it is, like you actually already have those skills. I think where we're at is getting to that place where we start to say, okay, the change is happening. Am I going to, now that it's conscious to me, am I going to embrace it and try to stay relevant and follow the change? Or am I going to bury my head in the sand because it does feel overwhelming?
Well, it's that lessening, your phrase is lessening the define, right? Lessening like how we're going to get there, just continual positive incremental motion is really we just don't know. We don't always know in what direction that motion is going to go.
We
And
don't, but
that's
like,
a little scary at times.
yeah, I mean, I can do it. I can it, or I think it's like, when you're floating down the river. I don't know if I know you've done floats before, Chad. I don't know if everyone has, but in Colorado, it's a really big thing where you get a chunk of river and you put in, everyone gets on inner tubes or rafts and you float down an hour or 2 hours, depending on what your course is. And you have to brave a lot of different scenarios all at the same time, right? You get to the place where you're, hey, I'm just going to notice all the changes around me. I'm going to float. I'm going to feel the sunshine. I'm going to crack a beer, have it in my hand. I'm going to look at the trees and the birds and, the amazing people I'm with. But that float is never just that, right? There's times where you get rapids.
True.
There's times where you get rocks that you have to move through. But I think that the thing that you have to remember is that we're smart enough beings that we don't have to operate to avoid rapids every second. And in our society, we don't always allow ourselves to, just float, just look at the river. There's always something in the
Just
back
be.
of our mind saying, you should do this, you should do that. And then going back to the lessening the define, meaning like, just be aware of the fact and conscious of the fact that you are in a moving state. That alone can help reduce stress and anxiety within your body. Like, that's all your body is trying to tell you when it gives you stress or anxiety. It's very, very fundamental. It's red or green. That's how your operating model works. And so I think that is really important for us as humans to remember is that we're actually okay with uncertainty. And sometimes what we need to say to ourselves is, hey, I'm in uncertain times.
So back to self-awareness, which we kind of talked about yesterday, but it's for me, I think it's also getting to the point where, I don't know, we're having so many conversations with so many different people, and you kind of, the energy exchange, right? You key into, they're a little anxious. They don't know, they don't know what's around the corner. I was having a conversation with a enablement professional earlier today, and you could hear the anxiety in her voice because they had decided to make some pretty significant changes in the organization because of the implementation of some of these Gen AI tools and the automation that they were able to pull off. And it impacted individuals, it impacted process, it impacted outputs, and it impacted, she was sharing that it impacted the way that it changed the way she viewed her job. And as a result of that, you can feel that anxiety. So it's really, I always forget the fortitude it takes to stay in that positive spot, right? In that positive mindset, or at least be able to come back to it fairly easily, right? Because it's really easy to go back to your float analogy, to get caught up in the flow of the rapid and not understand, or you lose sight of the bigger picture. Hey, the sun's shining, the beer, or for me it would be Jack Daniels, but whatever. You start to lose sight of that. I think that's a big challenge. It was a challenge for a lot of the leaders that we've worked with in the past, before AI accelerated the slipstream. Now I think it's even more, it's even more of a challenge. I mean, unless it's a challenge for me. So if somebody else has cracked the code out there, please, by all means, call me.
Me too. Call me. I agree with you. It can feel hard because I think that a lot of where we've been at, especially in the corporate workplace, is we've gotten to the place where we want to define everything and analyze everything. So, for instance, to go back to the rapids analogy, right? Like, hey, this mechanism worked when these two teams worked together to get us through that rapids. And then what we see happen is people are like, oh, how can we replicate that someplace else? Which is like awesome, right? Like, is there a learning from it you can replicate? But where I think that we get in the corporate world, this is my experience, and then having consulted for a lot of really large organizations I've seen as well, is that methodology should become a tool in the toolbox, getting these teams to work together when you have rapids. But instead, leaders and companies and organizations and cultures take that repeated pattern and say, we should use it everywhere. instead
Right.
of it being like, let's take the value of our lesson and, and really get clear on what did we learn here, and then have it available, rather than trying to force three different teams to do something that isn't organic to them and it isn't natural to them, which then, right, my experience has been, then you get people who kind of shut off, people who are resistant, tons of passive aggressiveness,
Ugh.
right? Because they're like, that's a stupid tool right now. We're floating and it's a mile wide river. There's no danger ahead. I can see for miles, right? So I guess we have the opportunity, right, to practice a little bit of, can we practice becoming aware of what are the lessons or what was working, without having to standardize and generalize and define that as the only way to float down the river.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the tools that's worked really well for me, and it takes a while because you have to get to a point where you're okay, you can keep your ego in check, you can be open to other inputs, other people's perspectives, is the concept of partnering, right? Like,
Mm.
you and I are partnered on this. In my other business, I partner with people all the time. That partnership dynamic works better when, in my opinion, when you have two people that are grounded, that understand that there's, what's that cliche phrase, all boats rise with the tide, or whatever we like to say, and then understand that you're not responsible for bringing it all to the partnership, but between the two of you, you're better off than as an individual. So, for example, I was talking to a coworker from my other business today, and I was describing you as the ultimate optimist, right? Tech hippie. And that I have a tendency to be more of the, skeptical, sarcastic, darker side, and it balances out really well. And I think as a result of that, with the back and forth that we're able to do as we go through and build out some of these courses and talk to some of these companies, we're able to bring kind of flexibility in the way we interact, which is a great model for others, but also allows me to not feel the weight of having to stand in the rapids alone, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure it does, right? It gives your sense of safety. Like, hey, there's somebody else here. I have another tool that if something were
Yeah.
to come up, like, right, like I have more available to me with other people than not. And I think that you're bringing up something that's really interesting about partnerism and figuring out working with other people. It's so confusing to me how little we incorporate people into our strategy, into our culture. We, give great marketing messages. We say, this is what we believe in, this is what we value. And then you go on a day-to-day meeting and that's not lived. Right. But I think what you're talking about, at least from what I'm understanding, is you're saying, hey, I figure out what works best for me about this other person. And that's how I get the balance that I need. Like I have to be trusted, I have to have trust and some vulnerability.
Yeah.
But in the long run, that's more of a reward than it is for me doing it by myself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I don't want to go all woo hooey, but like, I'm a Libra, so I'm constantly looking for balance, right? And I'm not, from working with me, we always used to joke, you either love me or you hate me, but you will have a reaction to me. And it is that, back and forth. And I've learned to modulate that as I've gotten older, and my experience has helped me understand how to do that. I've gotten the tools to do it. But in a business environment, it's that awareness of where I'm good at, and what I'm not. Right. Like, not only what I enjoy to do, like we talked about that before, like I want to be having fun doing this and, want to see where this goes, but I don't need to be the person that brings everything to the table. And that's where I think a lot of people have a tendency to struggle on teams, right? Is they think they need to bring more because they're looking at just their contribution rather than what the cohesion of the team and the balance and the back and forth of the teams are able to accomplish. And then of course there's the management challenge of how do you manage a team in that state if you haven't been trained to do that. And I think that that's a big piece that I'm kind of reconnecting with as we go through this process. It's like, okay, I can handle this, or, you know, we joke about organization skills, right? Like I'm bump, 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 and you're not. And so we're trying to find the middle ground there,
Or will
right?
I ever be? Just an alert.
Which is fair. It's totally fair. And I know that, right? Having spent time and worked with you, and I respect that, because your brain works differently than mine. And it's not wrong, and it doesn't have to be frustrating. It's just, okay, cool. I can adjust this. And as a result, by adjusting a little bit of myself, then we together are able to produce more, or uncover more, or accomplish more than if I had been trying to get it all done myself. And I don't know if that taps into like your emotional IQ. If part of it's the way we communicate, respectful communication, and things like that. I don't see enough of that in business today. And I think the need for it is increasing drastically as a result of all of these changes and the speed at which they're happening. Is that fair?
You know, that's really, you're really tapping on something, and it's a struggle I feel like I have experienced so many times. When do you, pull the conversation back that's gone down a rabbit hole that really is about two people just talking about what they know, right? Or when do you just be quiet and let something flourish in front of you, even if you're not sure what it is? You let two people who are figuring something out figure it out loud. And I think it's just interesting because within a team, we have many different roles, but our ego tells us, I need to raise my hand and contribute right now. When in reality, right, we have this whole big right brain that's creative and innovative, that sometimes listening and realizing it's not about you, right, can actually get you much further. But then in the corporate world, we have this, call it the need to, report to stock, shareholders and stuff like that every quarter. We've gotten to the point where we want to define everything so much that we actually end up stalling our journey by, multitudes. Like, let me give you an example. Let's say we're floating on a river from Colorado to DC, right? Where my experience has been within organizations, with myself, with leaders, is that I have to be accountable for saying, hey, the next tree that we're going to see is coming up on the right. And I have to provide some sort of analysis to prove that we've gone up the river. But at some point, right, like that all those points of the trees along the way get in the way of us actually getting to Washington, D.C., right? Like, it gets in the way of that. And so it's, how can we start as leaders changing our thinking and realizing, hey, is this actually more valuable, or can I automate this report of the tree analysis technology so that I can still show my report while I'm not stopping and having 15 people look at the, what's the seed look like on the tree? What's the bark? Does it have leaves, right? Like, how can we lessen that need for defining every step? Because I feel like if we can get there, if we can say, hey, we actually have a bigger goal where we're working towards, we don't have to stop and only look at the trees. We can then look at the birds and the sky and the weather and the rapids, and it'll just give us a lot more. And I think
take that analogy for a second, and let's go back to what we've both experienced. I'm thinking of very specific instances, which I won't go into detail about. Hopefully you'll go with me, but there are times where leaders, other team members, can't look beyond the next tree. They don't have the ability to achieve a vision of what is possible without taking one step in front of another. Like they have to, I have to go past this tree, then I got to go around this bend, then I'm going to go through these rapids, and eventually I'll get where I'm going. But they can't visualize, they can't come up with the vision for what's possible. And now I'm starting, as I listen to you kind of do that analogy, I'm wondering if that approach that I've got to define each step before I can really articulate and picture what the end result will be. If that's if it's stunted thinking, like if it keeps you from envisioning, it limits the possible, right? It
Yeah.
limits the possible, puts the blinders on.
It gives you one solution to look towards, which is the next tree. And you might have missed that there is a river, right, cutting off, going, that will get you there in half the time because you were looking at the next tree. Yeah, I completely think that happens. And I think that there's a lot of accountability for a lot of people who are like, nope, just tell me the next thing. I don't want to think of it on my own. You and I talk about this often as, right, critical thinking versus order takers. And truthfully, that's the society that we have set up today. But where we're at with AI, and especially for leaders who have teams, right, we need to be looking at how do I improve clarifying my destination better, right? How do I say, okay, I'm going to go from Colorado to St. Louis, and I need you guys to figure out how do I get to St. Louis? If I'm on my way to DC, right? How do I get there the fastest, safest, and most enjoyable, right? And that does cause a change in thinking for leaders because it means that you're saying there's multiple different paths, and I don't know which path my team is going to take. So there's a lot of courage in that to be able to say that. But I also feel like there's a lot of human growth. And we as humans, just like I said, we're evolutionary creatures that we can absolutely do that. But we do have to lessen that need of control and the ability to stand with our peers when our team isn't there and say, this is where they're going. I'll update you how far they've come. And it is different, right? And then be able to compare the results. So I'm going to say experimentation is really key with your own leadership style, with your own thinking, with your own communication. Because if you don't start doing that and letting go of your own, here's the destination I want you to get to, the next tree, then nobody underneath you can, or none of your partners that you're working with, they don't have that ability to either. You either have to agree on the next tree or say, St. Louis is my goal.
So all right. So that there's also a lot of trust in that. And we've seen this, we've experienced this firsthand. You want, ideally, I think AI is going to make it impossible for people to expect to be spoon-fed everything they need to do their job. If I can spoon feed somebody, if I can tell you how to do it, I can tell an AI agent how to do it. Right. So exactly. There's that creativity, there's the critical thinking, there's the initiative, there's self-awareness of what are you equipped with, what are you not equipped with. The one that I think that I see right now and have seen historically, I think will be a bigger issue is trust. Do I as a leader trust that I have individuals that are capable of getting to St. Louis? If I say we need to get to St. Louis, make it happen. Do I have someone who is self-aware enough to say, I can do that. I just need this or that, right? Like I need a map or whatever it may be, because I've never been to St. Louis or whatever it is. But do you have people that can break it down and think that way? And do you as a leader trust that they'll do it? Because a lot of them, like managers or VPs that I've seen and work with, they have a tendency to not micromanage, but it's, what do they call it? Helicopter parenting. It's very much that kind of, they're around, right? They're trusting, but verifying on such a short cycle that it kind of gets close to that micromanagement, or they don't believe that the team's going to be able to get it done. And they're like, I used to be when I was a first-time manager, was like, I'll just take care of that. I'll do it.
Yeah.
Right? That's not management. That's not leadership.
That's not.
That's just taking over.
If you're at the top and you have, 50 people under you and you feel like you're overworked and overwhelmed because you're doing everything, you got some leadership lessons to learn, especially now. We are not, post 1995, we are not in a linear world anymore, right? It's called the web for a reason, right? It's called, computational computing is exploding, or quantum computing, because of the fact that it's taking leaps and bounds and jumps. But I think that we have to I think that's a really great point, that as leaders, we have to look at that of, are we checking in on the cycles too much? Okay, it doesn't have to take much for you to be like, I myself am going to stop putting that pressure on for this week. I'm just going to practice this week. I'm going to check in on Friday with all my team, right? It's those small micro moments that make the bigger changes. And so I think that's where there's just a great opportunity. And if you seriously don't have anyone on your team who can do that, which it's a different skill, like being afraid to go into the unknown is a different skill. It takes a change agent, it takes a strategist, it takes someone who can, be visionary and understand, what the business needs, and then also understand how the product needs to be built. So it does take different thinking, but we've got a lot of people out there that can do it. And it's funny how many people I can just say that I've worked with who are in the opposite role. Either they're change agents who are in a very robotic role, right? Or they're very robotic roles, but they got promoted to a change agent position. And so I think I'm just going to suggest, right? Like, I always think you got to start with yourself, right? What can you do to change that energy of, paralysis by analysis, and encourage your own self to lessen your define or your need to understand everything.
But then I think the challenge becomes, if I'm in an organization, a lot of organizations promote from within, which is great, right? They'll take their top performers in a certain role. They'll say, hey, you get a promotion. Now you're going to run this team. Or, like they used to do, they used to say, well, why don't you run the team and show us you can do it? And then we'll talk about compensation. I don't think as many people are doing that these days, but they'll take those top performers, they'll put them in those roles, totally different set of skills. And one of the things that we've seen is the impact technology has on the way you have to essentially manage, right? One of the things that I've talked to some leaders about is, they, in essence, also have to be able to help coach and lead in an environment where the vast majority of your teams have an addiction that they really didn't know or don't understand was designed to keep them stuck to it, right? The phone, you see it all the time. Like, people can't, if it goes off, if it trips the dopamine, they're going to reach for it. If it vibrates, right? And so that's actually created, and it was it Nerial in Hooked, wrote the book Hooked, that gave birth to some of that stuff in terms of the user experience design. And now you've got a team that not only is the business moving fast, not only are the requirements of their job changing, not only is AI potentially changing the way they think or increasing their reliance on a different piece of technology. You also have the time management piece, the attention piece. I saw something somewhere that said average attention span of millennial, I don't know if it was millennials or Gen Z, was like 6 seconds. And so now you're dealing with, almost an ADHD environment that you have to lead in. That's a lot for any leader to deal with, to tackle.
Well, it is if you're trying to control it, right? Again, we're talking here a little bit about like letting some of that stuff happen. Human behavior creates really clear patterns if we're not analyzing every second, right? So if you let your team, kind of notice who are those people or what are those people and how can you change that environment? If one of your patterns is your team is always looking at their phone and not paying attention, what you can do is make everybody stand up, make everybody speak and say something in front of the group, go draw a picture on a whiteboard, right? Something that connects you back to your body, because when you get connected and when you get only in your own head, you do lose your connection with others. So even saying, I know it's that cliche of when people are like, oh, they're having me stand up after lunch. But the reason it still sticks around is because it's so valuable, right? Like, just get out of your head and into your body. So, right, just stand up, right? Stand up, do what you need to do, but move your body in a way. And that's where, as a leader, again, it's experimentation. It's trying to see, and you don't have to carry changing anyone's behavior. your job really should be to interrupt behavior that's not working towards the greater good, right? Like really look at how can you interrupt it. Sometimes it's making jokes about, okay, everyone's on their phone. Chad, just so you guys know, when I worked for him, he was notorious at calling people out in meetings. It was quite comical, and it sucked when you were called out, but it was actually really impactful because it was like, hey, so you can do it that way. You can do stand up. You can do a lot of different things like, hey, let's go down and have this meeting in the cafeteria, or let's go down to this space, right? There's just a million ways that you can do it. But the question is really looking at like, how can I affect and interrupt a pattern? But you don't have to control it. You don't have to take on the weight of, I'm going to get everybody to stop looking at their phones, because you're losing a battle there.
Yeah. And so, okay. So if you go back to, let's talk about performance-based culture, right? So we'll go back to the river. If I can come up with the vision and I'm going to lessen the define. I'm going to ask the team to help us get there. I'm going to trust that they're going to be able to pull that off. And then they don't. And so what we're talking about is, here's the vision. We need to be making progress. At some point, there's accountability for not getting us where we need to do, not performing to the levels that you need to perform. Decisions have to be made, right? Coach them, remove them, assign them somewhere else, do something else with them. I could probably count on one hand in the last 8 years the number of organizations I've seen where they have accountability in the culture. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are as you add AI into it, which is kind of the wild, wild west. Sometimes you never know what you're going to get when you start working with some of those tools or those models. How will it either enable or will it make it worse, this lack of ability to execute in a culture where there isn't or should be more accountability? What kind of impact do you think the tech's going to have?
Well, one, hopefully the tech is going to be able to take away some of the time consuming stuff that people are doing, so they can actually start thinking, more critical thinking to make an impact, to actually, get us to St. Louis faster or float us down the river. But it's funny because when you were talking, all I was hearing was those like, right, that analysis of, are they getting there? Well, in what was it, 2002, when a group of technologists came up with the Agile Manifesto, like they were really onto something. And sadly, that has been processized. It hasn't been adopted in the world as a mindset shift. It really was adopted as, here's another process. So then we have more processes, more reports, more checkpoints, rather than going to, I can check in every 2 weeks and see where the team got to, right? Or did they make movement or did they not? And where I think accountability plays in is if somebody says, we didn't get there, your first question as a leader better be, well, what did you learn then in this time? And they have to use the critical thinking to make sure that they're right, that they're not just going through the motions, because that's where I feel so much of it is there's people who are going through the motions of activity, because we're asking people about activity and we're not saying, well, what did you learn? Did you skip anything this week? Right? Did you feel like you found any shortcuts? Like, are we asking those questions as leaders rather than tell me what work you were done? What you did.
So it would almost be what did you learn, and what do you think you could have done differently, or what can you do differently moving forward?
Yeah.
Right. So okay. So even those two questions, that there are some that will be able to answer them, and there are some that won't. And so I'm curious, as we talk about the shift in mindset, as we talk about needing these human skills, critical thinking, and now, self-analysis, self-awareness, all of these types of things, there are going to be some that comes easier to, and there'll be some that won't want to do it or just won't do it.
Yeah.
The organization, the entity, whatever it may be, the business, even if it changes or evolves from strictly hierarchical to something different, there are still going to be times when people are effective, however you choose to define that, inside of the organization, and times when they're not effective. So then if in this new structure of whatever this org looks like, how do you determine who should be on the bus and who shouldn't?
I love that question, because that comes back to the personal accountability that we've been talking about.
Right. And I think it's a challenge today.
In the change today, like, you have to be personally accountable as a leader of, maybe you need to ask different questions. If you're not seeing it and your teammate isn't seeing it, it doesn't mean it's going to happen in one conversation. It might happen in 10 conversations, but you have to get to that human connection of, do you understand where I'm going and are you on board? And we also have to be honest as leaders to say, going back to the flow conversation, right? Sometimes you hit a whole tree full of branches on the side of the river, right? We have to be honest and say, hey, we hit a branch. I'm going to pull it out. Another thing as leaders that's really interesting is sometimes we don't even realize that we're putting a big, huge log into the middle of the river ourselves because of the questions we're asking, because your team might see, hey, this is actually getting me here. But if you don't understand it, you might be putting in a log. That takes personal accountability, and it takes the courage to say, hey, something's not working here. So going back to the river analogy, something should move. You either have to move backwards, you have to move forward, you have to move sideways. But when you're seeing yourself stuck with your team as a leader, you don't have to just be resigned if that's how it always will and keep running up against the book, right? Like, have that personal accountability to say something's got to shift and move. Maybe it's big, maybe it's little, but have that accountability as a leader to even bring that conversation to your team, so they might be able to help you. If you don't feel like you know something to move, then bring the question to the team, but have that courage to do that and know that you're going to be getting further by doing that rather than just running into the bush.
Yeah. Hey, do me a favor, turn your mic. I think you're talking into the side of it. It sounds a little tinny.
Okay. Is that better?
Yes.
I'm back a little bit too.
Yeah. And it's weird, right? We're always trying to optimize. But anyway, so thank you. I just noticed it was a little tinny, and you know how I get. So I apologize for that. The interesting thing, I think, the opportunity is huge, right? With this technological wave, you've got robotics, quantum computing, edible biology. You've got, of course, AI, which we're all talking about. We're talking about pretty significant changes. The restaurant in LA that is 100% robotic, right? That
just came out. That just was like in the last. I don't even know when it was, but it was recent.
I saw the video clip. I don't know exactly when it happened, but and they were talking about the impacts, right? They couldn't get people to do the jobs in California with it getting to $20 an hour for fast food for food workers. The businesses are like, hey, that's a tipping point. Like, we need to look at something different. And so you have all of this change that is happening, which creates anxiety, but let's go beyond that and think about what's possible to be positive, right? And optimistic that this can lead to something greater. The question I have is not only how do organizations handle it, but how does an individual in an organization equip themselves to be okay through that transition? Because I've seen leaders get real bogged down. Like you mentioned Agile. I remember when we used to roll Agile out, and people would freak out because it was just a different way of thinking. Some of them would shut down, some would lean in, but the percentage of people that lean in is much smaller in my experience than the percentage of people that either outwardly object or just wait. They wait to see if the snowball is actually going to roll down the hill. So how do we handle those situations?
I mean, so here's the good thing is we are mapping. We have 1,000 brains. We have all of our different parts of our brains are always mapping things. So we have this crazy analytical predictive system, right, in our brains. But as leaders, and if you want to look at where we're going about whether you should wait or not, I mean, just look at where we're at in the world today, right? Like, we're seeing corporations are really struggling. People are quitting and companies aren't rehiring them. So if you want to know where it's going, you can see by what's there today, right? But if you're interested in being like, hey, there is a change happening, then you do have to look a little bit differently and say, okay, my predictive mind is still working, even if I'm acknowledging that change is happening. It means that I do have the possibility to lessen the define and say, hey, a change is going on. I can't own it because it's going to be a whole collective. It's going to be all of us together as humanity deciding where it's going to go. But what I can do is define a little bit better how I'm going to interact or how I'm going to accept the change. So thinking about, we've got a whole world full of analysis of predicting everything, right? But we're human beings. We don't know. I just read this book called Fluke that talks about really things from someone's decision 40 years ago, or a vacation they took actually impacted where the first atomic bomb was dropped in Japan, right? Like there's little things that are always going to happen. And it happens in nature. It happens in our lives all over the place where little things happen. So we either can worry about everything that's going to happen, or we can have our eyes more open to the present, right? Of what's going on, that there is a change going on, and just be aware so you can start seeing the signs, because your mind will start shifting from having to have a short-term goal to a long-term goal if you take it on personally. And I don't think you can own changing it for everybody, but I do think as a leader, you can own the space to let some change happen. Right. So with Agile, we saw this is the way we're going. This is the way we're doing. I happen to be part of a company and a magical team that was like, holy cow, actually working in movement is so much easier than working in very defined sections. Like it's a lot less work. It's a lot less stress. It's way more exciting. And so I've gotten to see that benefit of like, holy cow, we're a group of 10 people who are just feeding off each other because that's what humans are wired to do. So I've gotten to see that win. I don't think everybody has gotten to see it, but in your own life, every one of us have had those moments where you're like, holy cow, it feels like the stars are aligning and everything's working and it's all easy. And that's what we're trying to get to with the change is to get to the place where it becomes easier for you so you can look at things differently and start taking in more rather than having to have an answer for a short-term answer for everything going on.
So are we looking at, so if I play that out, it sounds to me like we're looking for leaders to be able to have impact and understand basically how to coach people on the human side rather than, hey, this is the process. This is the process. You do this, you do that, you do this, you do that. That an AI agent could take care of, right? That's easily replaceable. So, and many people in management positions have relied on that to define their approach. They often will confuse management versus coaching or leadership, right? So now the management piece could even be automated to some extent, right? The analysis, the stats,
if you're spending your time checking in on your team, hey, get a dashboard created. You can do that real easily now, right? Right. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, and I think that the new leadership and the relevant leader going into, AI and just really post-pandemic is that you have to be able to be, you have to help manage change, right? Like I've seen a million, frameworks pop up after COVID of change management. And everyone's like, yeah, but you're still approaching change management the same way with the same thinking as you were before. It is about understanding that while you have individuals, you can actually encourage and coach each individual to shine their own light and highlight their best skills. And you can find a place, if you are looking at a bigger destination, you can find a place for them in that bigger destination. What I feel like a lot of leaders have been doing, and because the destinations are so small, is you're like, that person doesn't fit in. And you're like, yeah, they don't, but I only have one solution to go down. So one linear path. Whereas if we can think bigger, then you have more room for individuals to flourish And you have to be comfortable with leading people through change. At least the leaders that I think are going to be really being developed and growing over the next 5 to 10 years. It's going to be a different way of thinking, and that hard skill of just, I tell people what to do and they do it. That's going to go away because the robots will do it.
Well, yeah, it's not like it's worked really well.
I know, right.
But it goes back to, we noticed that as Gen Xers, you tell me to do what? So, you're looking at the potential, if the displacement opportunity is there, the opportunity for people to do different things, you're looking at potentially needing less leaders in organizations that can effectively grow using the AI augmentation path or the technology augmentation path, right? So if I've got AI agents that do this stuff, it makes sense that organizations may be able to accomplish more with less, or even more now if they keep the same people than they were before. But then the effectiveness of those leaders is completely different. And I don't know that organizations are, I don't know that I've seen that they're capable of that type of jump. So do we get to a point where some of the organizations themselves become irrelevant?
I'm sad to say yes. That's where I feel like it's leading to. Like, it won't be an overnight kill or anything like that, but it is going to be a slow death for, you can hold on to this, right? But we're seeing it's not working. We're feeling it from all of the divide in the world and the unhappiness, and right, like we're seeing it from the people standpoint that it's just not working. We're even seeing it from the money standpoint, right? Where companies are more profitable than ever and it's still not enough, right? Like there's something missing in the leadership realm. And I do think that in the short term, some of those jobs will be automated. And some of those jobs might go away as leaders. But I actually think that it's going to be more humanists, more thinkers, more builders, more creators that are going to be the leaders of the future. And so where we have the opportunity today is to start thinking about, okay, well, which one of those might I want to be? Where do I want to play in it? Because in 5-10 years, if the skills we know today as leaders have disappeared, there will be a new rise of leadership that can handle the change and can look at the bigger picture. And ideally, my hope, the ever optimist, is that we start, instead of just looking at how do we make profit for a company. Yes, we all want to make profit. What if we start thinking about things like that really affect humanity? Like, can we find a cure for this cancer? Can we, solve, there's just so many ways that we can do. Can we solve world hunger? Can we create peace, right? Like all of the things that you could actually be putting your work and leadership towards something greater for humanity. That's, of course, where I would love to see me.
I started to hear the Grateful Dead play. I started to hear the Grateful Dead play in the back of my head.
I'm just saying that's my dream world. But in reality is we are still going to see a leadership change. And I agree with you. I don't know if it will be like a blockbuster deal where it was kind of slow and then really fast. But I definitely think there is a huge opening right now for companies who are working differently. Most importantly, companies who are thinking differently, right? Adopting an adaptive mindset, which, by the way, is human beings' greatest strength compared to every other animal. We're really good at it, but adapting that mindset and not only relying on logic and reason, like still using logic and reason, but also looking at a more expansive picture so you can see more than one linear solution to get to any one answer.
So then there's also that philosophical conversation about the destination, the outcome would be influenced not only by your ability to think and be more human, but it also would be potentially shaped by, do you believe humanity is inherently good or inherently not? Right. And so this came up in another podcast I was looking at, because there's this thought, there was this kind of, I don't know, open talk track about the fact that if you look at the frontier models and the companies that have the money to train these models, they're all racing towards AGI. And the question was just simply asked, do you think whichever company achieves it first would actually tell the world, or would they do something different and keep it for themselves to further profits, further reach, further expansion, whatever it may be? That has a much larger underlying causality conversation, in my opinion. But it's one of those things where even as a leader in a team or in a community or whatever it is, you have the same question. What if you develop better skills to augment yourself more effectively with the technology while enhancing your humanness than other people in your circle? What would you do? Like, what you have to ask yourself, you have to have some of those hard conversations with yourself. Like, what kind of person are you really?
Yeah.
And,
What
and what does
feels
that look
good
like?
to you? What ultimately all we want to do as human beings is increase our reward and avoid any type of as much pain as possible, right? We are beings that there's always pain, there's always reward. But that's a good question. And that is a philosophical question. And Chad and I keep laughing at how we get into these philosophical conversations. And I feel like I'm a poet from the 14th century where you're like, oh yeah, this is a question about mankind. But then I go back and I look through history and I think of like here in the United States, we have the Constitution, which our founding fathers wrote. And if you actually look and read it, there's a lot about all the back and forth of different groups and how you actually, as leaders, you have to gain people's trust and belief in moving forward for the greater good. But that's some of the most human qualities we have as leaders, is to set a platform where we can create a destination and you need to get like-minded people to buy in. And so the question, Chad, might come down to the age-old question of good versus evil. If you have corporations, right,
Dun, dun, dun.
making a ton of money, right, and moving forward in a positive light, and that is outweighing the effort and the environments where they're, making a ton of money, but people are miserable or they're going towards something dark, like that is a question that we each have to answer. But that we also, it's kind of cool because we're at a place of reshaping how we work with AI. Like it's going to be reshaped. So, right, can we, the little, tech hippies, who are like me, right? Can we as the collective create things towards ways that will be better for ourselves, right? A more fun workplace, a more enjoyable workplace. Yes, we all make money, but we don't have such scarcity around that money, right? Like it's almost like we've put money as the goal. And we've, as leaders, right, we've all seen it, we've all felt it, right? Like there's still this really weird, if I don't get it, somebody else will. There's like a scarcity model.
Scarcity mindset.
Right. Rather than, hey, if I do this and 10 other people do this, our thinking is actually better. So we're going to I can make 5 times as much money than I would by myself if I go into a more collective mindset. So I don't think you and I can answer the good versus evil. I don't think anyone on this planet can, but it's a great question to be pondering, right? Where will your intention go? And I like your ask of look internal first before, going out there and decide what you want. It doesn't have to be a decision today, but just always be checking with yourself. Is this going to be one step in the right direction?
Well, it's that macro to micro. Like you can go like the ripples we talked about, right? There goes the rock into the water, and that first ripple is always us. But you want to go out and talk about where the ripples are going to go, because you don't know where it'll end. You don't know what it will be, but those are fun conversations. They aren't. Wow, they're fun for some people. They're fun for me, but they're not immediately actionable. But what is you being willing to enhance yourself, the human side of yourself, augment effectively with the technology, and do it in a way with a purpose, to fulfill a purpose that hopefully is for the greater good at the end of the day. There's a lot of hope in that. Like, I mean, we're hoping for a lot.
What if we don't have to worry about all the greater good? What if we looked at it like if we increase our own humanness, meaning we get a little bit more comfortable with the patterns we run and we start creating micro moments of choice, right? Like that does have a bigger effect. right? What if it's that we just have to start making choices that are towards our own personal destination? Everybody is wired for a purpose or things that they value that no company, no one else outside of you can bring. So, what if that's the responsibility we take on right now as change is happening to say, I'm going to work towards living more of the things that bring me joy, the things that I value as we're building a new place. And that will hopefully then allow others to also have the space to do that and the freedom to do that. I mean, that feels like a micro change that as leaders in business world, right, we can be like, okay, I'm not going to let myself get annoyed over somebody else's pattern. Instead, I'm going to get curious about it, right?
Well, but there are also situations where, and I've used this line when I've taught leadership classes before. Sometimes as a leader, you're not there to be somebody's friend.
Mhm.
There's a difference between a friendship and being a leader, right? So a lot of the individuals that I've dealt with struggle with that because they used to be part of the team and now they're running it because they got promoted, they were a top performer, whatever it may be. So you struggle with that. You're not there to be their friends. But you also have to be careful about the culture you create and then how you navigate performance, however you define it. I'm not saying analyze it, but there is a movement metric that we're going to need to be able to come up with in different situations, in different contexts, so that we can understand and assess, is someone positively contributing or are they not? And then we have to understand and hope that each individual has the strength of character to not quiet quit, which is a BS approach in my opinion, but to actually say, hey, this isn't for me. I need to go find something else.
Like, for
and I
that
don't
to
see a
be
lot of that
okay,
happening.
like, I can share with you, I remember a position where I was like really, really trying to fit into the game that the company was playing. And it took a lot of like slaying my personal demons to realize like that game is perfectly fine. But you know what? It's not the game that I want to play, and not having to, hate anybody, think badly of anybody, go there. Instead look at myself. And I think that as leaders, there's a lot about being honest with yourself that can remove a lot of those conversations about people quiet quitting, right? Like, if you learn to communicate and say, this is what I'm feeling. If you can say that without emotion and judgment and just talk about maybe a struggle that's there. Maybe it's, hey, you keep doing in this meeting, I see you constantly correcting people for misusing the wrong language or in their writing, or and get curious about it. You have the opportunity to figure out, first of all, why is somebody doing that, and then secondly, to be able to say, it doesn't make any sense to me, and I'm just curious as to why you're doing that. Like, learning to be honest and put it out there is a skill that leaders need to be practicing. And it feels brave and courageous, but it also can eliminate a lot of the other junk that comes around just not saying what you need to say.
Yeah. And then for me, it was always the help me understand, like, help me understand what you were thinking here, because I'm not sure I follow it. And that approach, I won't say all the time, often came from a place of positive place, but also the way I deliver it sometimes communicates something else. Like, help me understand WTF you were thinking here, because like this makes absolutely no sense to me. So part of that's the communication skill, part of that's the self-awareness, and part of that is really making sure you're controlling your mindset, right, in the way that you interact and lead. That isn't a default for many of the leaders that I have, many that are in management or leadership positions. It's not something that I see organizations spending the time to train them on. And then I wonder even if if we're not alone, and we've seen enough people talk about, future work and that kind of stuff, that there's enough people talking about this that we know, I don't want to call it a movement. Let's say there's motion in a direction, right? But the question becomes, like, if we're headed in that direction, how do you get an organization? How do you change yourself fast enough and is the organization you're currently in giving you the opportunity to do that? I don't think you can rely on companies that are trying to figure out, well, what do I do with these new technologies now? And
Yeah.
that's really where their focal point is. Or, hey, how do I optimize what I've got so I can get more growth? I think the entity of the organization itself is always going to think of itself first.
Yep.
And not enable the individuals in a way that would achieve what we're talking about here.
It's where, God, relevance just comes up, right? So I think there's a lot there in leadership today. Like you mentioned them being moved up. Like leadership can be really lonely because when you're talking to your boss, you're supposed to know all the things. And when you're talking to your team, you're supposed to know all the things. And then all of a sudden you can get to the place where you have a lot of people and you don't know all the things, and that can feel lonely, and you don't have as many peers anymore to talk to about it, right? So first of all, to all you leaders who are feeling lonely, I acknowledge you. I see you. It can be very lonely, right? But we need to, that's where the communication, if like really emotional communication, like understanding where people are coming from and them understanding where you're coming from, that's where as a leader, that opportunity is here right now, because we don't know what changes are going to happening. We don't know, your company is going to put bets on areas that you may or may not agree on. But I'm going to go back to kind of like, the feeling that my grandma always made me feel like I was safe and like I was okay who I was. No matter your circumstances at work, and I can, I have 100 in my head I could list off problems with right now, right through my past. You have circumstances, and we all have circumstances. And if you can find your own happiness and peace with these crazy constraints in a way to make the smallest shift, and then you keep practicing those small shifts, all of a sudden you can have a completely different perspective. I don't want to say you'll get to an aha moment, but there is, by working on yourself and learning to make a little bit of a perspective shift, you're going to start giving yourself more room, and you're going to go back all the way to the flow analysis. You're going to start widening your river base when you can be like, the circumstances are changed, or haven't changed, but I have. And that's a whole new perspective.
Yeah, it's going to be really, really interesting to see where this all goes. I really enjoyed the conversation. I look forward to having another one. Thanks everybody for joining us at the playground. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.